to Every Child in Focus Leadership series. This webinar is called Supporting LGBTQ Students in Bullying Prevention. We are hosting this in partnership with the Human Rights Campaign. Now, before we get started, I'd just like to review a little bit of the functionality of GoToWebinar. Your active participation is very important throughout this session, but right now I do have all the attendees on mute, so that way we won't be getting a lot of background noise. Throughout the presentation, I will be managing the chat functionality, so you'll notice in your little taskbar there's a chat box where you can enter in any problems or questions you might be having. We are going to hold for questions until the end of the presentation, and then I will read off any questions you've entered into that box, and our speakers will be able to answer those. Right there, it circles the questions box just in case you're having some issues locating it on the taskbar. So I'd like to welcome tonight's speakers. We are joined by our National PTA President, Laura Bay. We're also joined by Johanna Eager from the Human Rights Campaign. She is the director of their Welcoming Schools program. Now, Laura will be speaking a little bit more about National PTA's position and why this is such an important topic to us. So I'd like to welcome Laura now to speak a little bit about National PTA.
Thank you, Erin, and good evening to everyone. It's so great you're here tonight. Let us get started with talking about why we're here. To increase the focus on family engagement, and it's important for us to provide a strategic approach for places of learning. National PTA has developed the national standards for family school partnership back in 1997. Since then, these standards have been used in schools, PTAs, and by community leaders nationwide as a framework for family engagement. National PTA's fourth standard, as you can see on the screen, Speaking Up for Every Child, reinforces PTA's mission to make every child's potential a reality by engaging and empowering families and communities to advocate for all children. Every child should have access to a quality education, and that includes a safe and supporting learning environment. At the 2016 National Convention, National PTA adopted a resolution on the recognition of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer questioning, or LGBTQ individuals, as a protected class. This resolution calls for federal policies that specifically protect LGBTQ youth and local practices that create and maintain safe, affirming, and inclusive learning environments for all our students. Negative attitudes towards LGBTQ students and students who are perceived to be lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer and questioning puts them at an increased risk for violence and for bullying. Negative attitudes also impact a student's ability to learn at school. It is important and part of our mission that we create a safe and supportive school climate for LGBT students, which improves educational outcomes for all our students. In this webinar, you will learn how you can prevent bias-based bullying and create a more inclusive school climate to benefit all students. So now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Johanna Eager from the Human Rights Campaign Welcoming Schools programs to share more with all of us on this topic. Johanna, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. And thank you to everyone who's attending tonight. And for those of you who listen after the webinar is placed into the archives. Welcoming Schools and the Human Rights Campaign is really grateful for this partnership with National PTA. We really respect the work that you do. A special congratulations on your 2016 resolution regarding LGBTQ individuals as protected class. Certainly my being here and speaking with you tonight will fit right in with that important work that you're focused on doing. As the director of the Human Rights Campaign's Welcoming Schools program, I'm really grateful to share with you tonight some information about the impact of bullying on LGBTQ students, because I know that we can all do better in supporting our LGBTQ students, and certainly all youth in particular, those who are least served by our schools for many different reasons. And to begin with, we will be digging into talking about LGBTQ students and bullying, but first I'd just like to tell you a little bit about the Welcoming Schools program that I am the director of, so that you're familiar with it, you can understand the type of work that we do and where it is that we're coming from in working with you on this webinar. So on the slide you can see the 5 strands of the Welcoming Schools program, and those strands actually coincide with our professional development modules, which I'll talk to you about in just a minute. The Welcoming Schools program is working with elementary schools across the nation by providing training and resources and lessons. And so if you haven't heard about the Welcoming Schools program, you can go to www.welcomingschools.org, and we really are excited to have you visit. We have a lot of free resources and materials that you can use in supporting LGBTQ youth, as well as gender expansive youth, and all youth. We take an intersectional approach, and we really believe each identity of each student is important for schools and communities to acknowledge, for students to feel safe and to thrive. So let me talk to you a little bit about the professional development that we offer. That's one of an area that is unique to Welcoming Schools that a lot of programs cannot offer, although they offer amazing resources and materials. But what we do is we can actually go into schools and communities and provide professional development. And the training modules that we deliver are the ones that you see on your slide there. So we have an overview, we have a module about law and policies that protect LGBTQ and gender expansive students. We have a module on LGBTQ inclusive frameworks, understanding gender, bias-based bullying, embracing family diversity, and then supporting non-binary and transgender students. And we have certified facilitators across the nation that then go into schools and into communities and provide this type of professional development training. And a question that we often get is, so how do I get this in my school? And so the way that you can get Welcoming Schools into your school is certainly to spend time on our website and just take a look at all of the free resources and materials we have, including a free downloadable starter kit. The other thing you can do is when you go to the website, you can click on request a training or type in request a training in the search bar, and then there's a way that you can actually notify us that you would like someone from the team to connect with you. So that's just a little bit about the program. I would love to talk to you about it all day, but let's just get into what it is that we do when we go into schools. So I'd like to start by talking about vocabulary, because the terminology that we use is ever-changing and is likely to shift even after I share these definitions with you today. You know, they're culturally bound, and so what we can all commit to is just being as in the moment with the terminology as is possible. So let's run through these terms that go with LGBTQ. So the first one, lesbian, as you can see there, a woman who is emotionally, romantically, or sexually attracted to other women. Because we're an elementary-based program, when we go into elementary schools, the definition that we might share is something like two people who love each other, who both identify as women. And we really focus on love, families, and respect. The word gay is an interesting word because that is a word that has shifted in recent times. So historically, lesbian and gay were used as separate categories, but many people today are currently using gay to refer to men and or women who are in same-gender relationships. Bisexual is often overlooked and or the target of many jokes, both in and outside of the LGBT community. Bisexual identities are every bit as real as gay and lesbian and transgender identities. And in fact, just very recently, I received a request from a mother who is supportive of her bisexual daughter in high school. And when her daughter came out, I think it was around a situation involving homecoming or a homecoming dance, and the daughter told her teacher, when her teacher was making an assumption about her sexual orientation, that she was bisexual, and then the teacher was not supportive at all and called home and shared this private information. So we have a lot of work to do around supporting our bisexual students, and there are many, many, many of our youth who identify as bisexual. And then transgender or trans, those are umbrella terms that describe people whose gender identity or gender expression differs from the sex that they were assigned at birth. And queer, another really interesting one, the Q, the word is used a great deal now in the LGBTQ community, both in terms of sexual orientation and or gender identity. You may hear the word genderqueer with regard to gender identity. Queer is an excellent example of reclaimed language. It's okay to say queer. It's okay for students to say queer as long as they're not using it as a put down. So for some of us who maybe grew up with it being a derogatory word, it is actually widely accepted and used now. And in fact, the terms, if you think about it, the terms queer youth or queer studies have actually been around for a really long time, and many, many people in the LGBT community now are identifying as queer. And while we're talking about definitions, let's also talk about the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation, because they are often confused. And in fact, they are actually two different concepts. Gender identity is different from sexual orientation. And so, for example, a person that is transgender, a lot of people will assume that that means that their sexual orientation is gay or lesbian or bisexual, but in fact, a person who is transgender may be straight, may be gay, may be bisexual, may be asexual, or maybe none of those. And likewise, a person who identifies as heterosexual may be transgender. And so there are two separate categories, and we should make assumptions about who someone is based upon the other. So let's talk, now that we got the basics taken care of with some definitions, let's move into talking about some of the data around LGBT students. And I would like to share with you the most recent data that we have that reflects the lives of lesbian and gay and bisexual students. And this data comes from the Center for Disease Control. They have what's called a youth risk behavior survey that is conducted every 2 years. And so this survey was conducted in 2015, and then the data was released in just this year in 2016. And the data is based on a random sample of students in 25 states and 19 large urban school districts. And unfortunately, too, I'd like to point out that the T in transgender was not included in the survey. So you're hearing me say LGB. And I'm aware of a movement now to include questions related to transgender youth in the 2017 survey, and I'm certain that that will happen, but unfortunately it was not present in the 2015 survey. So as we look at this data, I will be talking about LGB and not LGBT youth. What's important to note on this particular slide, however, is that LGBT students were 2.5 times more likely than heterosexual students to have been afraid to go to school because they felt they didn't feel safe either on their way to school or at school. So 13% of LGB students didn't feel safe compared to 5% of heterosexual students. And so if you take a look at the title of this slide, Academic Achievement Factors, that's an academic achievement factor. Whenever a student is afraid, whenever a student is wondering about their safety, whenever a student is thinking about how they're going to pass in the hallway from one school or from one classroom to the next, they are not thinking about learning or academic achievement. And so all of this work is tied to the core purpose of schools, which is academic achievement. Let's take a look at one more slide from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. These statistics are disturbing. However, I hope this knowledge challenges you to become if you aren't an advocate yet for LGBTQ students, that you will become one, and if you are, that it brings an awareness that you need to be an even stronger advocate. It's pretty alarming to go through these statistics. Nonetheless, I think it's really important that we do. So I am going to walk you through some of these statistics. More than twice as many LGBT students than heterosexual students had not gone to school on at least one day during the 30 days before the survey because they felt they would be unsafe at school or on their way to or from school. More than twice as many LGBT students than heterosexual students were electronically bullied. LGBT students were bullied on school property almost twice as often as heterosexual students. LGBT students were threatened or injured with a weapon on school property twice as often as heterosexual students. LGBT students responded at a rate of 2 times that of heterosexual students, that they felt so sad or helpless almost every day for 2 or more weeks in a row that they stopped doing some usual activities. LGBT students seriously considered attempting suicide 2.5 times often as heterosexual students, and LGBT students attempted suicide 3.5 times more often than heterosexual students. And so why are we here today? Because this is our reality. We're still not in a place. I am supporting LGBTQ students, I think sometimes because marriage equality passed in the United States, that we think that we're in this place of acceptance for LGBTQ people, when in fact we're not. And my area of expertise is focusing on schools and LGBTQ students, and I have to say we have so much more work to do. So let's talk about what this bullying looks like in schools related to LGBTQ students. First of all, it's important to have a clear understanding of the word bullying. If I were to ask each person who's participating in this webinar how they define bullying, we'd all probably have a different definition. And so, and there are many different ways to define it. All definitions, however, regardless of how they're worded, share some common components that you can see in the slide. The behavior must involve an aggressive behavior. So aggression does not necessarily mean physical aggression. Many times it is actually verbal. Also, there must also be a power imbalance between parties. So this power may be physical, but it's just as likely to be power gained from social status or popularity or intellect. Also, the last component is that the behavior is repeated over time. And the caution here is that the behavior does not have to be seen by an adult repeatedly. Behavior is often repeated, though adults often are not aware of patterns until a serious event occurs. So do not wait for a pattern before responding to bullying. Address all negative behavior immediately. You can be fairly certain that by the time you see the behavior, it already has occurred multiple times. And let's dig just a little bit more deeply into bullying, because at Welcoming Schools, what we talk about is addressing what we call bias-based bullying. And bias-based bullying is really what's at the heart of the type of bullying that occurs in schools. If we do not proactively address the bias, we will never be able to truly change bullying behavior. It's really important that we understand that this is bias-based bullying. And by the word bias, we're talking about a person's individual identity. So this is deeply, deeply personal. This is about a person's race, their gender, their religion, their home or first language, their body size, their sexual orientation, their family structure. Bullying based on gender norms is actually the most common form of bullying in elementary schools. It's reported that the vast majority of bullying occurs when students do not conform to rigid gender role stereotypes regarding what a boy should look like and act like, or what a girl should look like and act like. Let's take a look at some of the statistics related to bias-based bullying. These statistics consistently show that in order to address bullying, we have to address bias-based bullying. And note that in the first bullet, that a student may not necessarily be LGBTQ to be bullied. So this is about all of our students. So for the parents that are listening, whether or not you have a child that identifies as LGBTQ doesn't necessarily matter, because all students are, whether they are LGBTQ or perceived to be LGBTQ, may be bullied for this reason. And again, it's due to rigid gender role stereotypes in which there are cultural expectations about what it means to express oneself as a boy or a girl. So for example, a boy who does not identify as gay may be perceived to be gay simply because of his choice to play the flute in choir versus spending his time going out for football. And all students should have the right to express themselves regardless of their gender identity to participate in any school activity without fear of being bullied. And this is why it's important to talk specifically about proactive measures to handle not just bullying, but bias-based bullying. In order to truly create an environment where bullying is addressed, we should lay the groundwork for respect and inclusion that's related to all these differences that all of our students bring into the school and that we all have within our own communities. And please note as well that final box there on the slide, that an action that you can take in your school or school district is that you can review your school district's anti-bullying process or anti-bullying policy to be sure that it's enumerated, meaning that your anti-bullying policy specifically lists LGBTQ and gender expression and gender identity in the policy, because research shows it actually makes a difference in creating more safety for LGBTQ and gender expansive students. So let's talk now about what are the strategies for how to intervene when bullying occurs. I'd like to share with you a step-by-step module that we use at Welcoming Schools. We share this with educators. This is good for all of us to use in our personal lives, in our professional lives, when interacting with schools. So I'm going to walk you through each one of these steps and elaborate a little bit beyond what's on the slide. So for the first one, stopping the bullying, we actually need you to say the word stop when intervening. So you could just simply say something such as, this needs to stop. And then two, name the bullying behavior. So for example, what I just saw was bullying, which is not tolerated in this school. Or you could say something like, I overheard you calling him gay. Negatively, using that word as a put down is not okay in this school. And then turn to the student who was just targeted by the bullying behavior. It's really important to make sure that this student who's the target is okay, and to send them either back to class or to a counselor or to their teacher before speaking to those that were involved in the bullying. I know it's easy that in a bullying situation you just turn to the student who's exhibiting the bullying behavior, but we need to take care of the target first. It's important to let them know that you will be checking in with them later. This is really key to building trust and showing that you care. So you can say something to the target such as, you know, what just happened was not okay. Are you all right to go back to class, or would you like to talk to a counselor or your teacher? I'm going to check in on you later to make sure that you are okay. You can be assured that I'll follow up on this. And then you can send that student on their way and get back to them later. If there are bystanders involved, so there's students who aren't actually participating in the bullying behavior, but maybe they're laughing or encouraging the student who is exhibiting the bullying behavior, then your next step is to actually engage them and say to them, why were you laughing? Or you could say something like, why did you think it was okay to act this way? And the key here, it's not to discipline, but rather to put them on notice by explaining that what they did was inappropriate, and if behavior like that continues, that they will be held accountable for that action, for their actions as well. And then you can turn to the student that was bullying, and make sure you don't spend time debating with them what happened. Rather, it's a time to let them know that the behavior was simply not okay, and that a more in-depth discussion should happen at a later time when emotions are not heightened. And so you could say something to them like, what just happened was not acceptable. It's never okay to treat your peers in this manner. Right now we will not be debating what happened, and we will discuss this later when we both have had time to reflect. And then you need to follow up. You'll need to follow up with both the student who's the target of the bullying And then you also need to follow up with the student who exhibited the bullying behavior. But in the meantime, you can get the details that you need that will help you to determine appropriate consequences to the student who was bullying, and then reinforce to the student who was bullied that they deserve to be treated respectfully. So that process, while it took me a while to explain it to you, actually happens very quickly. You know, within minutes, actually. You address the, you stop it, you address the student who was the target, you send them on their way, you turn to the students who are the bystanders, you turn to the student who's participating in the bullying, and it actually happens quite quickly. So let's talk about, related to LGBTQ topics, a comment or a phrase that gets said quite often, which is "that's so gay." I know, at least for me, I'd like to think that that doesn't happen anymore, because this phrase has literally been around for decades, but unfortunately it still is really prevalent in our culture, and is still said, in and out of classrooms in the United States. So here are some simple ways to respond to this statement, whether it's in your household or at school or with your friends or colleagues. First of all, going back to how to intervene when bullying occurs is one, to stop it. So you can say stop it. It's not okay to say "that's so gay," or you could say, "Do you know why this is hurtful?" And then we have heard from students, in particular elementary students, who have said it's not enough, adults, for you to just stop it. You need to educate. You need to teach the student, or in this case, teach the colleague, teach the family member, etc., that why it's not okay. So, in school we can take time to discuss this, or you could take time to discuss this at a PTA meeting and be clear about why it's hurtful, and provide accurate information. If you hear it from a student saying it, you might even want to say to them, "Do you know what gay means?" The next step is to be proactive, meaning there are a number of steps that we can take so that this doesn't happen. We can develop an environment of respect in our schools and communities by modeling inclusive language ourselves. So, for example, when talking about families in our school community or families in our PTA, that we watch our language and that we're always inclusive of LGBTQ families, not to mention there's so many different family structures. We talk about that a lot at Welcoming Schools, and so just by not assuming that all families are heterosexual would be a great first step to take. Also, we can share and develop clear policies regarding disrespectful use of the word gay, or unfortunately the word fag is also out there, or any other word that's used derogatorily related to LGBTQ people. And also we could include LGBTQ inclusive lessons at school that educate students about LGBTQ people and that teach respect. And we have a lot of lessons on our website that are free for anyone to download. Also, when you hear comments like "that's so gay," don't ignore it. Saying anything is better than saying nothing. Harassment will not go away if we don't address it. And also, don't excuse the behavior. Sometimes we've seen people say things such as, like "Josh doesn't really know what it means." And what we found out is that, as young as elementary school, that actually students do know what it means when they're using these words or phrases negatively. And also, don't try to assess how upset the target is in the moment. Students may often say that they're okay. If we check in, "Hey, are you okay?" When we stop someone from saying "that's so gay" to another student, they may just say they're okay, even if they're not, just because of the power imbalance. So that's why it's so important to follow up. It's unlikely that any of us will go through life without hearing this phrase, and so this is one that you can practice responding to ahead of time. Like, what will you say the next time you hear this being said in your school or in your community or in your household, and you can actually practice it. And speaking of practicing, let's talk about what we call the teachable moment. So the teachable moment is actually a phrase that we use in education, meaning all sorts of things happen in the classroom. I was actually a teacher for 10 years, and all sorts of stuff came up, you know, every day, every hour of every day, and there was always the question of, you know, do I take time to address this? This is a teachable moment. And so what we recommend is that it's as I said before, it's better to say something than nothing. And you can always follow up later if you feel that you need to clarify or elaborate on what you said. When I first started practicing interrupting statements that were homophobic or that were racist, I was just really scared when I would do it, and I was lucky sometimes to get anything out, but I really did believe that no matter what, I could go back and say more, even though I might have been adrenalized in the moment. At least I said something, and that's really important. So the good news is that you can practice. You can practice, practice, and practice. To improve any school takes practice. If you practice how to respond, your actual response will be much more effective. I used to actually practice when I was driving my car home from school. I would, you know, think about the comments that were made in my classroom that day, and then think about the ways that I would like to respond more effectively, or if I didn't take the teachable moment, how I wanted to next time and what I would say, and I would just talk out loud and try and work it out. Also know your own triggers, or, you know, meaning what are you more and less comfortable talking about. So for some people, they've never talked about LGBTQ topics, they've never interrupted an anti-LGBTQ statement, and so it is really uncomfortable. And in this case, if you think about this and know where your triggers are, know where the places are that you're less comfortable, then you can, again, practice ahead of time. It's also an important thing to remember that you're a role model for students, and that they are going to follow your lead. You're a role model for your children. They will follow your lead. If you don't address hurtful name calling, really, how can we expect them to do it? And also, the other thing that we know is that say that's so gay is, you know, the anti-LGBTQ comment that's made in your presence, and let's say that you have students also around you, or LGBTQ students who are students of color, or are students who have a disability, etc. You know, all students who are targets of bias-based bullying are going to be paying attention, whether it's their identity or not. They're paying attention to see if you're going to address that gay comment, because they need to know if, when someone's making a comment about them, if you're going to be addressing it and creating a safe space for them as well. So let's talk, let's move a little bit around beyond ways to respond in the moment, and talk a bit about specifically how to support LGBTQ students, and or specific strategies for supporting LGBTQ students. Let's start with the first bullet there that says, do not make assumptions about student sexual orientation. And so don't do that. Practice not doing that. Practice not knowing what anyone's sexual orientation is. And in particular, if a student does choose to confide in you their sexual orientation, please keep their trust. And a great response would be, you know, how can I support you? And likewise, do not assume that all your students or all of your students' families are heterosexual. This can come up in schools, around dating, around school dances. You know, I hear people make comments even about babies or young children, comments assuming what their sexual orientation is going to be. So step back from that and take a look at where your thinking is and what assumptions you might be making about sexual orientation. Also, it's really critical that you help support GSAs in your school. Historically, GSAs, and many still are, called gay-straight alliances, but a lot of them have been changing the language to gender and sexuality alliances, because not all LGBTQ students identify within the binary being either gay or straight, and nor does their gender conform to a binary of being male or female. And so in middle and high school, you can help to ensure a safe space for all students by supporting the GSA at your school, or you could be an advisor, or you could volunteer to help with the GSA, or if there isn't a GSA, the most important thing you can do is start working with folks at the school who can help to develop a GSA. There's been a lot of research over the years that shows that there is so much more safety for LGBTQ students if there is a GSA at school. Also, as we've been talking in this webinar, address the anti-LGBTQ comments that you hear, address every single one of them if you can, and most importantly, practice doing this. And then also, we can work on including LGBTQ content, history, and people in the school curriculum. And so for many of you that may not be educators, but obviously participate with PTA, there are spots on curriculum committees for you to get involved. And this is really, really critical. LGBTQ youth today are reporting to us that they do not have pretty much any experience of seeing themselves reflected in the school curriculum. And we know it's really critical for students to be able to see themselves reflected. There's a colleague of mine who came up with this concept. Her name is Emily Stiles, of curriculum as window and mirror, meaning that all students need to have a balance of both looking out a window to learn new content related to the experiences of others, but to also have mirrors that reflect back their own reality. And mirrors are far too infrequently found for LGBTQ and gender expansive students when it comes to the school's formal and hidden curriculum. And then finally, professional development training. You can provide, help. I've worked with PTAs actually who have really wanted welcoming schools to come in and work not only with the PTA but with the teachers and educators in the school. And so you can be an advocate for this type of training to occur at the school. And my shameless plug is that, we do this. Welcoming Schools does provide specific training modules, as I covered at the beginning. And so we're one of many resources out there for helping to provide some actual content and helping educators and PTA members to get up to speed on being able to best support LGBTQ students and families in the school and in the school district. And then also, I also wanted to just talk a little bit, even though we're focusing on LGBTQ students, I wanted to focus a bit on talking about transgender and non-binary students and shifting just quickly to talking a bit about gender. And so I know we defined LGBTQ earlier, and I'm assuming that the word non-binary might be a new word for many of you, and so I'd like to just quickly define that. And that term refers to any gender identity that does not fall into the standard categories of male and female. And so a similar term is genderqueer. I know I mentioned that earlier, and it's usually considered, the word non-binary is considered, or a non-binary identity is considered to be under the transgender umbrella, and some non-binary people also identify as transgender. So let's talk about some of the ways that we can support trans and non-binary students. Names and pronouns. Students have the right to be called by the names and pronouns consistent with their gender identity. That's just critical. It's just so important. I'm not even sure what else to say about that, but really respect and call people by the names and the pronouns that they have identified are important to them, or not only are important to them, it's just simply is what their identity is. And dress codes are another important point to take a look at. Students have the right to dress and present themselves in a way that is consistent with their gender identity, so long as they follow the rules for how to dress that apply to all students. In other words, we're really hoping that schools, and are recommending that schools will move toward more gender neutral dress codes at school. And if a school does have a gender dress code, then a student should get to dress in alignment with their gender identity, and this includes how students dress at school every day, as well as for dances, graduations, other school events. Also, restrooms, locker rooms, facilities. I mean, that could be its own PowerPoint or its own webinar. But just briefly, I'd just like to say that students have the right to use restrooms, locker rooms, and other facilities that are consistent with their gender identity and can't be forced to use separate facilities. The Department of Education, the Department of Justice released guidelines for schools in May of 2016 of this year, and they're very clear about this. And schools have been and can be sued for not providing access to facilities for all students. So just a couple important ways to support our trans and non-binary students. And then finally, I'd like to move into just talking about some of the concerns about being LGBTQ inclusive, because there are plenty of people that may be concerned about being LGBT inclusive at school. And so we just have a couple talking points that you can use when responding to people. So at school, all students and all families need to be respected, including LGBTQ families and students. And as such, we need to provide students with accurate information about people who are in their communities. Respect is not a topic that should be debated, and engaging in any sort of values debate is definitely to be avoided. Like, don't go to that place. Instead, use the talking points that are on this slide. At school, the value that is being upheld is that all families and students are welcome and will be respected, and that this is and always has been the job of educators to ensure a safe and welcoming space for learning for all students and all families. Despite the fact that for decades, addressing derogatory LGBTQ and gender topics in elementary schools have been avoided, but no, we're not avoiding it any longer. There's developmentally appropriate language at every level for being inclusive of LGBTQ students and families. And what we teach about LGBTQ topics at school may not be reinforced at home, and it's important that we respect what a child's family teaches them, and to share with the child that when they are at school, we expect them to be respectful of LGBTQ people and families, and it may be different at home. It's always, at school, staff have a responsibility, regardless of their personal values, to be LGBTQ and gender inclusive and to address derogatory LGBTQ and gender-based comments. And so, you know, in summary, we're just going to talk about the fact that schools include LGBTQ families and students, and that it is always been the responsibility of schools to provide a safe and respectful learning environment for all schools, and that includes LGBTQ, for all students, including LGBTQ students and families. So there's no need to get into a values debate. There's just a need to state what it is that's the responsibility of schools and of educators. And then in particular, how can a PTA support LGBTQ students? I have a number of ideas. One thing that we actually always do when we work with the school is eventually we will host some sort of family night, and a PTA could certainly host a family night. The family nights are fabulous. Some have had included panels speaking on LGBTQ topics, or we've had like family panels with different family structures on the panel. We've had family nights where families attend with their children and they read LGBT inclusive picture books at the elementary level. There's just you can't go wrong. There's just so many different ways and ideas for hosting a family night where LGBTQ topics are at the center of the evening, or are just an inclusive part of the evening. You know, you can have a family night, as I said, focused on let's talk about all types of family structures, and you're simply being inclusive of LGBTQ families by having one person on the family represent LGBTQ families. How else can you help? You can be an ally. Allies are critical to LGBTQ inclusion. There are times when an ally's voice may be heard over the voice of member of a marginalized community. So, know your terminology and know the issues that are critical for LGBTQ inclusion at home and or at school and in your community, and then always be wearing that hat of an LGBTQ ally. You get on the school board, be an active member of your PTA, serve on the curriculum committee, help to make sure that your policies are LGBTQ inclusive. There's just so many ways that you can step in and create safe schools for students, and as you saw by the statistics that I shared at the beginning, they really need our help. And then also you can start at home with your own children. Don't wait for school to be LGBT inclusive. Be inclusive in your own home. Talk to your own children about anti-LGBTQ statements and bullying, and encourage them not to participate and to be upstanders when they do hear negative comments, and let your own children know that you accept them regardless of their gender identity or sexual orientation. Make sure your home is a safe, supportive, affirming space as a model for what we want in our schools. And I've already mentioned the importance of bullying policies being enumerated. So with that, I will say thank you. That was a lot of talking. I really appreciate your listening and just thinking and taking to heart these topics and the ways that we can better support our LGBTQ youth. And I hope that by the next time I speak with you to share the YRBS report, we'll start seeing that things have changed for them.
Great. Thank you, Johanna, so much. That was such a great presentation, and I really appreciate you coming and sharing the Welcoming Schools curriculum and teaching us more about bias-based bullying. At this time, I would like to open up the floor for questions from the audience. So if you have a question, just go ahead and type it into the little questions box in the side taskbar. And I think I might have some already. Let me open it up real fast, and I will read them out. So our first question is, can restorative justice be used in addressing a student doing the bullying and the student being targeted?
I'm actually not a restorative justice expert, but I do know that many of the schools that we work with do use restorative justice, and so yes, absolutely, it's an amazing program, and it would be wonderful to use. Yeah.
Great. I have another question. It is, what should a student do or say if they witness bullying and no teacher or no other adult that they trust is around to tell?
There's a number of different things that a student can do. They can, I'm hesitating because there's so many things they can do. They can address, it depends upon how they feel. So I want to be careful with this, because I think in the past we've said that that a student could address the student who's the bully, and that may not feel safe for all students. And so what we do today is we talk to students about that there are many different things that they do. So they could go up to the student who's the target of the bullying behavior and say, just go up and touch them on the shoulder and say, hey, let's go and let's get to class. Or they may even distract the bully if they're friends with the bully and say, hey, let's get going. If they feel confident enough, or their relationship and the power differential is okay, then they could actually, say stop themselves. If there's not a teacher or anyone else around, then they can go tell a teacher or a trusted adult. Those are some typical things that they can do. What we always encourage students, regardless of if they feel like they can intervene or not, that it's really critical that they go and get an adult or go tell an adult.
Great, thank you. One of our next questions, a little bit more technical about the webinar, they were just asking if they are able to share this webinar through their PTA Facebook page. Yes, absolutely, and I am recording this webinar, so I will be sharing out the recorded video of this webinar to all the attendees, and we will also be hosting it on the pta.org/everychild page under Leadership Series and LGBTQ. You'll notice that URL is right underneath this slide. So you can go to that page for the videos, but additionally, I will be emailing it out to all of the attendees, or all the registrants really. So even if someone is unable to attend right now, they'll be able to access it. So yeah, that answers that one. Another question that I know we've received on our webinars before, and especially around this topic in particular, is trying to spearhead, you know, doing advocacy around LGBTQ students in a school where perhaps it hasn't been chartered territory before. It is maybe not an environment or a culture that would be as receptive to it. And so I know we've had our PT members asking, how do they maybe introduce that topic or start that conversation when it's something that would be very unfamiliar to the administration and for the school culture?
Yeah, you know, and we do work in lots of geographic regions of the country, and some in really conservative areas. And so a lot of the ways that, actually the primary way that we will begin in a school district that's not just going to want to start talking about LGBTQ topics is to go in by talking about bullying and anti-bullying, because there's very few schools in the nation that aren't wanting to or aren't actively addressing bullying, or, you know, have some sort of bullying prevention program. And so that's a pretty typical way that we'll go in, and then we'll move out from there, and certainly just start to be inclusive of LGBTQ topics, because there's really no way to talk about bullying without, as I mentioned in the webinar, talking about the ways students get bullied, in particular with regard to gender role stereotypes, you know, meaning if they step outside of a gender role stereotype, that they're going to be a target of bullying. So I would enter in that way. Also, we enter in through what's called SEL, or social emotional learning program. So if an elementary school or a middle school has an SEL program, you know, where like students meet together in the classroom in the mornings with the teacher, and they talk about building community and being respectful to one another. That's another way that we connect with schools. Gosh, I bet even, you know, 90% of the time we're somehow connected to an SEL program with the schools that we're working with. And then it's, again, just a matter of, once we start talking about those lessons and that are being used in the SEL program, like steps to respect, etc., you know, being LGBT inclusive. So there's a way to do it where being LGBTQ isn't the main game, but instead we just work on being inclusive. The third way too that you could enter in is by talking about family structures. As I mentioned also in the webinar, there are just so many family structures, and unfortunately so many of us are programmed still to talk about families as mom and dad, even though we have, you know, single parent families, we have LGBTQ families, we have military families, we have families with deceased parents, we have multi-generational, multiracial, you name it. And so another way to go in is to talk about families, and then, like I said, if you were to host some sort of panel about all of the different family structures, you would be inclusive of an LGBTQ family. I hope that helps. Those are just a few ideas.
Yeah, I think that's great insight. I did have another, not so much of a question as much as a comment from one of our participants. They just wanted to mention that they feel it is so important that we understand a student's family might not know that a child is identifying as LGBTQ, and to never out the child preemptively to their family. And I'm sure, Johanna, you probably have more that you could talk about related to that, since the Welcoming Schools is a lot of times teaching the educators how to handle situations like that.
Yes, so thank you who said that, because that should be said in this webinar. And it's a matter of safety. It's a matter sometimes of life or death for students. You know, family rejection is incredibly difficult. Sometimes it can be a catalyst for a student to take their own life. So when you are the trusted adult of an LGBTQ student, then you must. And, you know, legally under FERPA, I always forget what it stands for, but it's the it's about private. It's a Privacy National Federal Privacy Act in schools. Educators may not out students to families. That's confidential information. So yes, thank you for the person who wrote that in, and it's a safety issue. And so we should just take that students, if they trust us, coming out to us in confidence, and then, like I said in the webinar, asking them, how can I support you? And certainly by not outing them. Right.
That's great information to take into consideration.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, especially it's National Coming Out Day today, and
I know
there's just so many people who do not feel comfortable coming out. It's a safety issue. So again, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of segues nicely into one of the other questions, which is, you know, there is students at the elementary age where maybe they are not identifying so much as LGBTQ. It could be, you know, the bias based on perceived LGBTQ status. And so then you have students who are maybe older high school age who are openly identifying or maybe starting to come out. How does that change how maybe parents support students at those different age levels, and also how maybe educators respond to those different age groups?
With regard to their coming out? I'm not sure quite in the question.
Yeah, I guess as far as supporting students if they are at a younger level where perhaps they haven't really identified their orientation as much, but how to talk to them about it. Is there a different approach, or is it pretty much it can still be a universal approach?
You know, it's somewhat different, actually. I mean, it is different. We definitely talk in a different way about LGBTQ topics in elementary school than we do in middle and high school. In elementary school, we focus a lot on talking about families and love and respect. So in elementary school, we want elementary students who already, most of them are very aware of LGBTQ people. Either they're people in their lives or people they know or love, or they hear about LGBTQ people or see them in movies or by participating just in U.S. media. And so what we want to do in elementary school is, in a developmentally appropriate way, help them to know for sure, you know, definitions of LGBTQ in ways that work for elementary students, and then to really focus on respect and love and families. And then also we have noticed, though, more recently that there are sometimes some emerging LGBTQ identities in elementary school, and so we just want to be safe adults for if that is happening in elementary school. And then in middle school and high school, like I said before, it is a little different. You know, you may be confided in, and then you can ask the student and let the student take the lead for, you know, ask them the question, how can I support you? And then you can also support them by having inclusive language. Like, students are really looking for a couple things at middle and high school from us. They are looking to have an experience in school that's LGBTQ inclusive. They do not want to have an experience of never being seen or included in the curriculum or just included in examples in class. And then they also want to know that you have their back, that if there are that are being made, that you're going to address them, and that you're going to provide a safe, supportive environment for them to thrive, and certainly to support the GSAs in school too. They need places to gather and be together and talk about their experiences. So there's just so much that we can do to be affirming and supportive, and it's not enough. It's really important to make the statement that it's not enough that we focus on safe schools. We want to focus on safe schools where students are affirmed and where they can thrive. I want to go way beyond safety.
Great. I think we have time for just one more question. And this participant was asking if we had a list of resources or books that we could supply to our libraries as a parenting resource.
Yeah. If you go to the Welcoming Schools website, again, it's welcomingschools.org, we have a prolific number of book lists for elementary school readers, middle readers, and then for adults. So you can find certainly fabulous book lists, and we work really hard to keep them up to date because there's so many books that are coming out very recently on these topics. So yes, we have those for you.
Great, and I made sure and brought up that site again just so anyone who hasn't already gotten the URL, it's www.welcomingschools.org, and you will be able to find more resources there.
Erin, too, if I could add that one thing that PTAs could do and have done historically in schools that I've worked with is that having books in schools that are LGBTQ inclusive or about LGBTQ topics to educate all students about LGBTQ topics is really important. And I've been in a lot of schools where PTAs have actually given grants to teachers and administrators to, have sets of books in the classrooms and in schools. And so I'd just like to say thank you for my experience with PTAs in providing those books that are so critical to the safety and the ability for all of our students to thrive.
Great. I'm so glad to hear that. And I think that's a great point to bring up also for any PTAs or PT members listening who are looking for other ways that they can support and maybe bring those materials and resources and education to their schools. That's a great point.
Yeah, I've had an experience even just this summer where a PTA paid to bring me in to train the educators. So PTAs have been really, many times at the center of helping to do this work. So I just really think it's wonderful that we're having this webinar, and in particular, I'm excited about your new resolution.
Great, yeah, and we're so excited to have you guys as partners and to be able to do these types of webinars now. And I did have one more comment from one of our audience members, just a shameless plug. They were just saying they have chartered a PTA on Long Island, the Long Island Gay PTSA. And I think I remember you might have been on the last webinar we did with the HRSC. So I think I remember you. Hello. Yes, they're saying hi. Yeah. So we've also had some PTSAs that are incorporating that inclusivity into their actual chartered PTAs. So that's great. We really applaud what you guys are doing. And I'd just like to say thank you again to all the attendees. Thank you so much to the speakers. And I will publish this recorded video onto our YouTube channel and then onto our Every Child in Focus Leadership Series page probably within the next 24 hours. So thank you, everyone.
And thank you, Johanna, thank you, Erin, and thank you, everyone who came tonight. You all have a good, safe night, and we'll sign off. And I look forward to seeing tweets and Twitter posts and Facebook posts as we get the message out. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.